It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to thank the organizers, especially Bill and Kim, for the invitation. I want to thank all of you in the audience for being here today, and I want to thank one of my newest friends, Judy Stein, who I was really delighted to get to spend a good part of the last couple of days with, and who has really generously introduced me to this exceptionally beautiful part of the country. So thank you, Judy, too. I spent a few years in advertising at a big agency in Chicago before going to law school. And my boss there taught me that when you write a title for a presentation, it should be sharp, it should be pithy, it should be immediately comprehensible to the audience. As you can see, I disregarded her advice across the board. And for that reason, I feel obliged to explain the title that I've put up there. A few months ago, my friend and colleague, Zaid Raad Hussein, who leads the International Peace Institute in New York, published an article in Foreign Affairs, and in it, he observed that peace building and bridge building have something in common. And that is that when you build a bridge, like when you build peace, you've got to build it from both sides, not just one. These days, there is a lot of discussion about Israel, Palestine in policy forums, whether in Washington or in Munich or in Doha or other capitals around the world. And the discussion in those contexts tends to focus on the near side of the bridge, on short-term considerations. And that focus means that the discussions revolve around things like establishing a ceasefire, a real one this time, humanitarian access and reconstruction in Gaza, stabilization, disarmament, demobilization, and maybe, just maybe, on addressing and trying to reduce provocative actions. And to be sure, all of that is urgent. All of that is important, particularly when you look at the news cycle that all of us are confronting. Just a few days ago, 11 Palestinians were killed when an Israeli strike targeted a tent in one of the many camps of displaced persons in the Gaza Strip, adding 11 deaths to the 600 who have already perished since the ceasefire, and the 72,000 who have died over the last couple of years during the genocide. Israel continues to demolish homes and a lot of other structures in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip, raising real concerns about what its intentions are, whether it will follow through on its commitment actually to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Although aid has finally been allowed in, it's not coming in nearly fast enough, not nearly at the levels needed to nourish and to shelter a population that has been living in tents and exposed to the elements for much of the last couple of years. The sole crossing that connects the Gaza Strip to the outside world, the Rafah crossing, has just begun to open for movement of persons, but again, that's been halting, and unfortunately, there's been very little movement into the Gaza Strip permitted by Israel. And as Israel commences its most far-reaching effort in the West Bank to confiscate and annex land, there have also been almost daily attacks, pogroms, as Ehud Olmert, Israel's past prime minister, called them, that have plunged the entire Palestinian countryside into fear. So on the near side of the bridge, there's a lot to keep us busy. There's a lot to worry about. But experience makes clear that if we focus only on the near side, if we fail to give necessary attention to the far side of the bridge, we run into trouble. And what do I mean by the far side of the bridge? What I mean by that is the work of imagining peace, of thinking through the norms, the institutions, the arrangements that can give it structure and can give it resonance and resilience. If we fail to do those things, if we fail to work on the far side of the bridge, then we risk not only losing confidence, not only losing momentum, but also losing our way. I realize that a lot of people no longer believe in peace in Israel-Palestine. Many no longer believe it's useful to talk about a two-state solution, which is widely considered among both Palestinians and Israelis a road to nowhere. Many think discussing any solution is an unhelpful distraction or a naive preoccupation in view of what is happening on the ground. But our failure to achieve peace during the decades of the Oslo process, during some of which I worked, made clear to me what feels like a really important lesson, which is that if you don't know where you're going, you're probably not going to get there. My purpose today is not to convince you that peace is imminent, or even that a credible peace process is imminent, nor am I arguing that it's easy, though I do plan to be more normative than analytical, like my colleagues all day today. But I do remain convinced that peace is possible. And I'd like to tell you about a vision for a peaceful future in Israel-Palestine that I think is worth building toward. Now, I suspect that you're all familiar with the map, so I won't spend much time acquainting you with it. But what may not be as familiar is the scale. We live in an incredibly intimate space in Israel-Palestine, a space that is roughly the size of New Jersey, and a space that is not only small, but in which Israelis and Palestinians live close by each other in almost every corner. That's not to say that it's not segregated. It's one of the most segregated places in ethnic terms that I've ever lived. But it is the case that in almost every corner of the country, we live in close proximity to one another. And that's in part a function of the fact that we have a large population for the size of that space. And a population, as Professor Landis pointed out earlier today, that is roughly at parity. We have around the same number of Palestinians and Israeli Jews residing in the territory. Now, the specific numbers that you see up on that screen are a few years old, and there have been some significant changes, not least in Gaza, that raise questions about what the current numbers are. But they give you a sense of the distribution of the population, and they also give you a sense of what is most fundamental to my mind, which is that there is a need for two populations about equal in population to share this space. And the question that we've got to confront, that we've got to grapple with, is how do we do it equitably? After all that has happened between us, in light of the world and the region in which we live, how do we do it equitably? Now, as Magna pointed out, I served earlier in my career as a legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team in what used to be called the Middle East peace process, and in the negotiations that culminated in the summits at Camp David and Taba. In those days, we were trying to find a way to agree on a two-state solution But in essence, what we were really undertaking to do was to agree on the terms of our separation. And that word separation loomed large over our efforts. That concept did. In 1999, when Ehud Barak ran for Prime Minister of Israel, his slogan was something that might have captured or been reflected in Professor Landis' presentation earlier today. His slogan was, "Us here, them there, peace with Barak." And that idea, separation, ran through the approach of dealing with every single issue on the table. And it made it incredibly difficult to address some of the issues that had been dividing Israelis and Palestinians for a long time. Take, for example, what you see on the screen. This is a map of the northern West Bank. What you can see in blue, in dark blue or built-up areas, and light blue are areas that are under broader municipal control of the Israeli settlements spreading across the northern West Bank. Settlements whose population in those days already felt like a formidable barrier to peacemaking. And in these days, as I noted earlier, now numbers around 750,000 if you include both East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And so the framework of separation meant that there was an incredibly difficult choice to make vis-a-vis those settlements. Either they would be annexed by Israel in ways that would involve very serious and difficult to reconcile Palestinian concessions with regard to territory. And you can see here, sorry, my slides are a little out of order. You can see on the left the kind of proposals that were put forward at one stage in the negotiations during the Camp David talks, where such substantial areas of Palestinian territory would be annexed that Palestinians feared for the viability of the state that we were trying to build. And indeed, that kind of approach culminated by 2020 in the proposal set forward by President Trump, which involved a Palestinian state so circumscribed territorially and functionally that the word state hardly felt like an appropriate label to attach to it. So one side of the Hobson's choice presented here involved wide-scale annexation, but even in the context of pretty significant annexation, we had the other side of the Hobson's choice, which was the need for hundreds of thousands of Israelis to be evacuated from the settlements, to be relocated to Israel. And the settlements weren't the only problem presented by this paradigm of separation. Also challenging was the fact that millions of Palestinians who fled or who were expelled from their homes inside Israel in 1948, who continue to regard those places as home and who seek return to those places, would find that under a paradigm of separation, of ethnic segregation, that return could not occur, that Israel would be the state for the Jewish people, and that if they returned anywhere, it would be to a Palestinian state and to spaces, cities and towns that were not their own. In addition to that, we had the challenge of trying to find a solution to the problem presented by Jerusalem, a city that is already currently mixed between Palestinians and Israelis, ethnically speaking. And as you can see on the right side of the screen, on the left side of the screen, but the right side of the map, what you see up there is that East Jerusalem is comprised of neighborhoods that include both Israeli settlements marked in blue, and Palestinian populated areas marked in green. Finding a way to draw a line that would separate these populations while maintaining the integrity of a city that runs presently as an organic whole. That was yet another formidable barrier. And all of this raised the question of where, more broadly, the border would be drawn between Israel and a state of Palestine. And in that framework, there was the sense that because what we were dealing with was a space that was cherished, the length and breadth of it, by both Palestinians and Israelis, because after all, when you talk about Palestine, it's the same place as Israel. When you talk about Israel, it's the same place as Palestine. Many Palestinians like me wear a necklace with a map on it. And I confess, it's not a map of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And that's in part because, as Ethan pointed out, my family comes from Jaffa, comes from inside what's Israel. But the truth of the matter is that for both Jews and for Palestinians, there is an attachment to the entire space. So what is there to do about all of this? I'd like to sketch, in the limited time that I've got left, both a vision and a process, and to speak about why I think imagination remains a crucial thing for us to turn to at this juncture. I serve on the board of an organization called A Land for All, which is a joint Israeli Jewish and Palestinian movement. And what we advance is a vision organized around the principle of 2 states, 1 homeland. The core idea is simple. 2 sovereign states, much in the same way we've been discussing for a long time, with borders based on the 1967 lines. Capital for each state in Jerusalem, a seat for each state at the United Nations, separate constitutional orders, true sovereignty in many respects. But there's a fundamental difference, because instead of separation, what we advocate for is a recognition, as I was indicating earlier, that this single space, Israel-Palestine, is 1 homeland. And what that recognition means in practice is that we advocate for freedom of movement and ultimately freedom of residence for all Palestinians and for all Israelis across the homeland that we share. It might sound like science fiction, but it's not so exotic. Any of you who have spent time in the Schengen area would recognize it. Any of you who have spent time in other places where conflict was not so remote, like the UK-Ireland free travel area, would also recognize it. Indeed, even when bombs were exploding in London, there was freedom of travel between the UK and Ireland. And so what we advocate for, and I'll come back to this slide, but I will urge you to check out our website with this QR code. What we advocate for is not only a regime of freedom of movement and residence, but also one in which there are robust shared institutions, confederal institutions, that establish a possibility for Palestinians and Israelis to cooperate at a deep level with regard to the broad array of issues that implicate our common concerns, while also allowing us at the national level and at the subnational level to retain control where necessary. It's a framework through which Israelis' concerns about ensuring that a Jewish majority will continue to exist in Israel are preserved by delinking citizenship and residency, so that Palestinians who return to live in Israel would become permanent residents of the state of Israel, while Conversely, Israeli settlers could remain in place in the West Bank, in places that they are connected to through tradition and religion, as permanent residents of a state of Palestine subject to Palestinian sovereignty. Now, I realize that all of this may sound very far removed from the reality that we're living today, and it is. But I'd like to say a last thing, and there's much more that I could say during our question and answer period. Although A Land for All has been around a decade, more than a decade in the making, it's the product of discussions between Palestinians and Israelis in a range of contexts over thousands of hours. Although it has that longer life, our joint board of Palestinians and Israelis was constituted in September 2023. And we had our first meeting on October 10th, 2023, via Zoom. We worried that the meeting would descend into acrimony, that what we had built would be lost, that the anger that we could see all over the country would also permeate that Zoom space. By that point, not only had 1,200 Israelis been slaughtered on October 7th, but thousands of Palestinians had also been killed in Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip already in a couple of days. And in the weeks that followed, we would learn that one of our dear colleagues, Vivian Silver, was among those murdered on October 7th. We would learn that one of our board members lost 23 family members in an Israeli strike in late October 2023. But what kept all of us coming together was not just the fact that we had built relationships over this period of time. It was instead that those relationships were organized around a set of values, around a commitment to equality, around a commitment to mutual recognition and to mutual self-determination. And what I'd like to say to you in closing is that that circle that you see reflected on the screen and that has been expanding, not contracting, over these terrible years of horror in Israel-Palestine over the last few years, is one that is held together by values, and that the extent to which we keep our eyes focused on those values, the extent to which we say, yes, peace is hard at present, implementing a regime of freedom of movement and residence is hard at present, but focusing on the far side of the bridge may ultimately enable us to walk across it at some juncture, while failing to see that horizon will ensure that we never do. Thanks very much.